Donald Trump is on trial in 4 different venues.
Yep.
There's going to be a lot of witnesses. There's going to be a lot of evidence gathered. And we have a poll that comes out showing that he is, it's certainly possible he will be elected president. At the same time, we begin hearing stories about how he intends to weaponize the Department of Justice to go after his enemies. He begins to refer to his critics and opponents as vermin. This may not be covered by the judge's gag orders, but you can see that he's creating an environment where he is saying, you really don't want to cross me. If you are thinking of going into a court of law and testifying against me, this is what might happen to you. It's at such a big level. It's almost like, above the level of the judge's ability to gag. But that's what's happening right now. He's also saying that if you have committed crimes on my behalf, I'm going to pardon you. He's made it very clear. So on the one hand, I can obstruct this case through pardoning.
Correct.
On the other hand, I can obstruct this case by the intimidation and the threats of anyone who would testify against me. And this is happening in broad daylight in real time.
Correct. No, that's absolutely right. I mean, you could make an argument that his First Amendment rights, to talk about vermin should be curtailed. But that would probably go too far. I think that the gag order subjecting him to potential penalties for can only be applied with regard to specific witnesses. But he's crossed those lines, and he probably will in the future.
Oh, yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, this is the stuff of authoritarianism, of mob bosses. It's basically, I will do whatever it takes to get even. And and when he tells people, I will be your,
retribution,
weapon of vengeance, retribution. Right. I mean, he's really talking about himself because he's the only person he actually cares about.
So yesterday in the news, of course, his older sister, Marianne Trump Berry, who was a longtime federal judge, passed away.
Respected federal judge.
And I think that you noted this on social media. Trump's first post since the news broke this morning of his sister's passing. This is Donald Trump. First post after his sister has passed away. Donald J. Trump. Deranged Jack Smith, Andrew Weissman, Lisa Monaco, the team of losers and misfits from Crew, and all the rest of the radical left zealots and thugs who have been working illegally for years to take me down will end up because of their suffering from a horrible disease, Trump derangement syndrome, in a mental institution by the time my next term as president is successfully completed. Make America great again. I'm not sure where that sentence went there.
Look, I think we should cut him slack for anything he said. Yeah, I think we need to cut him slack today because his sister did pass away. So
he is grieving.
Very upset about that. Yeah, he's grieving, and it must be just a devastating loss for him.
His sister, though, did understand him, didn't she?
She did, and there was that famous recording that
all he wants to do is appeal to his base. He has no principles, none. His goddamn tweet and lying. Oh my God, I'm talking too freely, but the change of stories, the lack of preparation, the lying, holy, etc.
Right, and she also talked about how the stable genius. She told her niece, I guess, about how. The stable genius had somebody take the SATs for him. For money.
Okay. One last question. Since we're talking about the rule of law, also on Monday, the Supreme Court announced for the first time that it was creating a code of ethics that will cover itself. And of course, this comes after all of these reports of the lavish trips and the gifts that were given to Supreme Court justices like Clarence Thomas, et cetera. Your thoughts? Glass half full, glass half full, empty,
I think it's a positive thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it is really nuts that the Supreme Court has not had binding ethics rules applicable to it. Because when you look at what the federal courts do, I mean, most cases in a federal district court and even in a U.S. Court of Appeals matter to nobody except the particular party's issue and decide no major issues of law, whereas the Supreme Court decides things, and not just about, we're not just talking about the hot button issues that people like to rant and rave about, like abortion and affirmative action, the 5-4 votes. Every case is taken because it impacts a lot of other cases, just about every case. And, I had a securities case I won in the Supreme Court. That was my one time in the Supreme Court. And it wasn't just, it was like $1 billion for my client probably, but there were lots of other clients, lots of other companies that had cases throughout the federal system or potentially in the federal system, represented by armies of lawyers in other courts and other jurisdictions. And, they all had an interest in my case every bit as much as my client did. But when you go to the disqualification sheets, when you go to the conflicts memos that you would have in a court of appeals or a district court or in the Supreme Court, all those parties aren't listed. So it makes sense to have rules. The Supreme Court needs to have rules that are even stricter than what apply to lower court judges. And I think the way to make up for that is to pay them more. First year associates at some law firms get paid more than some Supreme Court justices. It's crazy. We don't pay these judges enough. We should be paying them more, but subjecting them to more rules. And, but this is a start. I don't know whether it is the complete answer. I think Congress is going to have to take a look at it. I don't agree with Justice Alito and some others that the Supreme Court is basically immune from this kind of regulation. I think that Congress has the power to prescribe rules, just as affecting the federal judiciary, just as it prescribes salaries, just as it sets the budget. And it requires this among in the executive branch too. So I think that there is probably going to be some room for congressional regulation, although I haven't read what the court did today, but I think it's a very, very useful step that the court is trying to promote confidence in its decisions by taking this important step.
Well, my big question is who enforces it? Is the court going to enforce it on itself, or is there some mechanism?
Well, I'll say this. I mean, it's not clear to me that if a justice signs one of these disclosure forms and it's materially omissive, that could possibly, I think there's probably a federal statute or two that would apply to that. And I think, and also if a justice were to take, I don't know, a loan and then have it written off, that's income. That's income. And if that doesn't go
for most of us.
Most of us, I mean, I'm not saying this happened, but if it were to happen and say $250,000 for an RV, I don't know. We're written off, and it weren't reported as income. I mean, that's tax evasion.
I just don't have close enough friends who are willing to give me a $500,000 RV and then write off the loan. I don't know. I have not lived the right kind of life.
Yeah. I mean, I one of the remarks I did a panel with Judge Ludick at our event this week, and I just said, I just think about poor Abe Fortas rolling in his grave.
Yeah.
Who he basically could have become Chief Justice. He was going to become Chief Justice, but for $20,000 that he took from this guy Wolfson. I mean.
Yeah,
it's just,
and then he had the grace though to resign, which of course,
because the Nixon Justice Department was threatening to prosecute him.
Yeah, well, but that was so last
there
century.
There are enforcement mechanisms. Yeah,
George Conway,
yes,
lawyer and a longtime Trump critic, who is one of the co-founders of the Society for the Rule of Law, along with Judge Michael Ludick, former Congresswoman Barbara Comstock. Best of luck. The timing could not be any better. Thank you for your time, George. And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We will be back tomorrow, and we'll do this all over again.